The final topic in Unit 1 that I'm asking you to cover over the summer is language. Language will be the subject of both Essential Tasks 5 and then subsequently Essential Task 6. For Essential Task 1.5, I recommend horizontal, as you will soon see in just a moment. And in terms of the text that you need to write at the very top, all you need to write is synthesize the use of language. What you see here is the entirety of the concept map. What you see under structure has 3 boxes across. Underneath grammar, there is a difference broken down again here. And then underneath the portion of stages, this is kind of the first time we've seen something like this. This is going to happen a lot more in Unit 9, the unit named Developmental Psychology, when we break down topics in regards to aging. But in this rather long, width-wise box, we're going to go through 3 separate terms. In terms of your overall spacing, I would kind of envision this as 3 boxes left to right. Ultimately, though, and I'll even give you this preview, which is something I commonly would do in class, there's not an exorbitant amount of text on each of these. The definitions of these are actually quite short, only a few different words. So as you're positioning your concept map and spacing for the stages portion, you don't need to add too much space. It shouldn't be too hard and too challenging to fit. But going back to the top of this, so we can zoom back out and you can more appropriately prepare, the concept map is language, structure, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes, and then stages, which is either one somewhat wide box or 3 separate left to right. You might see a little bit of information over here. This is over here, these 3 boxes, Essential Task 1.6. So although I know the language is broken down again into development over here, that's going to be a separate essential task in a separate video. So in terms of what you need to concept map, it's the region here under structure and the region under stages. In order to truly understand language, we need to identify some key terms that relate to language. So this might seem a little unusual to talk about in the context of psychology, but I promise in Essential Task 1.6, some of this information will make a little bit more sense in terms of why we're talking about it in the first place. But when we look at languages, like English, for example, we can identify a few different things. The first are the unique phonemes that exist in a given language. Phonemes are the distinct sounds in a spoken language. In English, for example, there are approximately 40 different sounds that when you combine them together, produce all of the words in the English language. Most of the time, individual letters in and of themselves are phonemes. However, there are a few combinations of letters when together produce only one single sound. So, for example, the word bat, 3 simple letters, is actually a word that has 3 phonemes, b, a, t. Each of those indicating one sound. However, if you look at the word chat, in English, that ch, when we see it together, ch, is one single sound. So although that is 4 letters, it's actually still only 3 phonemes. It's not inconceivable that the AP exam provides you a word and asks you how many phonemes are in that word. The easiest trick to identifying the quantity of phonemes is to sort of track how many times your tongue moves when making sounds, when you pronounce the words really slowly. Sh, a, t. 3 phonemes. In terms of a mnemonic, when you look at the word phoneme, to me the word phone stands out. Phones make obviously a lot of sound, whether that's your cell phone or a regular phone. When I look at the word phone in phonemes, I always think of sounds, and that's how I connect it to the sounds in a given language. Fun fact, my older brother actually originally went to college for linguistics. He was hoping to be a translator. One of the reasons why he decided to switch majors was because learning multiple languages at once was challenging due to the vast number of phonemes from English and French and all of the other various languages that he was learning. Opposing phonemes, moving 1 box to the right, is what we call morphemes. Morphemes are the smallest units in a given language that actually convey meaning. And it doesn't have to be an actual word, so I'll give you plenty of examples in a second of morphemes. The word milk cannot be broken down any further than it already is. Milk has one singular meaning. It means the drink. Therefore, it has 1 morpheme. However, if you add an S to the end of milk and turn it into milks, it would have 2 morphemes. Why? The word milk in our language carries meaning. And then what happens when you add S to the end of any word? it turns it into plural. So that S conveys meaning to the reader, or conveys meaning to the individual using the English language. S all of a sudden makes it not just milk, but many milks. The word desire is an interesting one. In some cases, the DE at the beginning of a word can convey meaning, but SIRE doesn't. So desire itself is singularly one given morpheme. However, if you were to add able at the end of it, all of a sudden that changes the meaning. Desirable is different than desire. Therefore, when you look at the word desirable, you break down desire and able into two morphemes. The word undesirable has three. UN, when placed at the beginning of a word, such as undesirable, conveys unique meaning. So instead of worrying about sounds and pronouncing words slowly, with this we are essentially breaking down things like S for plural, ing, able, the UN at the beginning of a word, or just singular nouns like the word milk, or other types of words like desire. As a mnemonic, when I look at the word morpheme, I identify the letter M and I think of meaning. So you have phonemes for sounds, and then morphemes, which is a term that looks similar. So this can be a confusing pair. But luckily, there's an easy mnemonic or memory trick, that's what the M stands for, that differentiates these two words. Moving forward to the final portion of structure, we have the word grammar. I know grammar is a term that you've seen culturally. It's a term that we use all the time. It's a term that you've probably used in foreign languages and also in your English class. Grammar is just all of the given rules in a language that dictates communication. When you learn foreign language, you spend a ton of time learning about grammar, learning about different tenses and how to conjugate. That's essentially what grammar is. All of the given rules that dictate what is necessary in order to communicate properly within the given language. In terms of grammar, there are two types of grammar terms that you could conceivably see within this unit and on the AP exam. In terms of how far down on your piece of paper, this is the furthest down that you need to go to give you a sense of where we are. We've done these two boxes in grammar. We're going to complete these two boxes underneath grammar, and then we're going to transition to stages. And once we finish stages, that will complete the essential task. Each given language, whether that's English or Spanish or any of the other languages that you've learned, can be broken down into semantics and syntax. Semantics are the rules in a given language that determine what type of meaning we derive when we actually read the sentences. So, for example, if I say, I walked to school, and then I add an ed and say, I walked to school, all of a sudden that changes the meaning. And because I have a good understanding of the English grammar, I now know that the ed meant I walked to school in the past. That's what ed does. Or if I say, I am walking to school, I understand what the ing conveys. So adding ed to the end of the word walk or laughed or any other term changes the meaning of a sentence. And because I have a good understanding of English grammar, I can understand what that means on a semantic level. However, there are some sentences that can be structured properly that in terms of English language do not have any semantic meaning. Like, for example, the green apple ate a soda can. Unless you're really abstract, this sentence doesn't actually make any sense. Apples do not eat soda cans. You would have to make it cartoonish. This would have to be something in an abstract universe. In terms of the way the English language works, I understand what all of these words mean, but because apples do not eat, this sentence doesn't really have any semantic meaning. As a mnemonic, when I look at the word semantic, I isolate the MAN and I think of the phrase, what do you mean, man? Semantics is all about, what does this sentence mean? Do I actually understand what the sentence means? Usually that's in the context of sentences that do have semantic meaning, like I walk to school versus I am walking to school versus I walked to school. Your ability to understand the difference between all three of those sentences illustrates your semantic understanding of the English language. Alternatively, there is what we call syntax. This is the final grammar-related term that we need to know. Each given language has a variety of syntax rules which determine the proper arrangement of words within a sentence. So, for example, in English, we would say White House. In Spanish, we would say Casablanca, which translated literally is house white. The adjective and the noun are flipped. Determining the arrangement of adjectives and nouns and verbs and all of the various other forms of language is dependent on that language's syntax. As a mnemonic, I offer two separate. When I see the word tax at the end of syntax, I always consider that every year you need to arrange your taxes. So I use the word tax and I identify the word arrange. If you can connect the word arrange to syntax, that's usually sufficient. Because here you have rules dictating sentence meaning. Here you have rules dictating how you physically structure a sentence properly. Or if you're familiar with Star Wars and are more specifically familiar with Yoda, Yoda has some really weird syntax. When I look at the word syntax, it has the letter Y. That's not a very common letter in the English language. And conveniently, Yoda's first name has a Y, so I connect the Y and the Y. Syntax, Yoda has odd. If you're familiar with Star Wars, that's somewhat how he talks. Feel free to watch this clip for a few moments. It's an example of some Yoda dialogue that illustrates the way Yoda arranges sentences is a little unusual. It's not also how sentences are arranged in English. He has his own syntax. Moving forward to the very final portion of the essential task, and just before we get there, I always like to show this sentence when talking about this. This sentence is so famous, it actually has its own Wikipedia entry, so feel free to check if you don't believe me. This sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, was produced by Noam Chomsky, who is by many considered the father of modern linguistics. This sentence was designed in order to show that sentences can actually have proper syntax, meaning the words can be arranged appropriately. The noun and the verb and the adjectives and the adverbs are technically positioned properly. However, something cannot be both colorless and green. Ideas do not sleep, nor can you really sleep furiously. And if you could sleep furiously, still, ideas are not going to be sleeping furiously. So in terms of syntax, this actually is designed properly. It's arranged properly. It doesn't have any meaning in our language. It's completely beyond abstract. This is an example of a sentence with perfect syntax, but no semantics at all. The final portion of our essential task is under stages. This is a bit of a preview of some of the things that we're going to talk about in Unit 9 when we get to developmental psychology, when we track how certain behaviors and skills change as individuals age. We're going to start with language, though, in the context of the first few months of life. Starting with what's called the babbling stage. The babbling stage is the very first few months of life when you begin to produce some sounds. This is primarily from roughly the months of 4 through roughly 10. And it is at this point that young babies and infants can produce sounds like dada, baba, things like that. They're babbling. What's really important, though, is that when a child is babbling, when it is classified that a child is babbling, we consider that pre-linguistic, because children are not actually conveying anything to you when they are uttering these sounds, which can be made quite unfortunate because one of the most common babbles is dada. It's very common for a 6-month-old to produce a sound that sounds a lot like dada, which might cause fathers to think that their child has said their first word and their first word is the name of their parent, when in reality, if that sound is being produced that young, it's almost assuredly an example of the babbling stage. And when a child is producing that sound, they are not connecting dada to their father, and therefore it is not considered a word, and it is not considered anything linguistic. Any of these sounds that do not have any meaning attached to them whatsoever are classified as babbling. Might be worth going home and seeing, or just simply asking now to your parent or guardian or anyone that was around when you were that young what your first word was. It's not inconceivable that it was actually just a babble. And perhaps when you get old enough to have children, you can think about that when you start listening out for words around 10 months. But when you do start listening for words, you're going to be listening in what's called the holophrastic speech stage. It can sometimes be called the one-word stage, which is a much simpler definition. But I would like you to be aware of the more proper term, holophrastic speech, or the holophrastic stage. It is during this stage, which lasts a little over a year and a half approximately, from about 10 months to almost 2 years, where children convey what they want, primarily through one single word, and hopefully they're able to convey the entirety of their thoughts with just that word. So, for example, a child who's a year old might say doggy, which to them means, look, there's a dog across the street. And then perhaps when they're home, when they say doggy, they might be conveying, where is our pet dog? Or perhaps when they're watching television and they say doggy, they might be conveying, look, there is a dog on the television. To them, they are unable to group words together and produce complex sentences, so one single word needs to dictate the entirety of what they're trying to convey to you. But because they are actually trying to convey their thoughts or their demands or wants, this is classified as the first actual stage where linguistics are demonstrated. As a mnemonic, when I look at the word holophrastic, there's a couple things. The first is that I notice the double O. And when I see the O, I always think of the word one. So that's one simple way. I connect the double O. Alternatively, this isn't as effective as a mnemonic, but this letter L here kind of looks like the number one. It's not a super reliable mnemonic. So the best mnemonic for this word is you see the O, connect it with one. Holophrastic is when one word is used to determine the entirety of a child's meaning. Around 2 years, though, a shift occurs, and this is the furthest to the right and the very last box in this essential task. When a child reaches 2 years to about 2.5, they exhibit what's called telegraphic speech, or the telegraphic stage, sometimes called the two-word stage, and it is precisely what you think. Children at this point can group words together, making very simple statements, but they convey quite a bit more meaning than just doggy. Instead, they can say things like, where doggy, or doggy TV, or they can say things like all gone, or mommy see, baby draw, as the picture to the right illustrates. All of a sudden, being able to group two words together makes what they are trying to communicate much more sophisticated. So we differentiate it from the previous stage. Once a child, though, hits about 2.5 years, their language is going to blossom incredibly for the remainder of their childhood.